Okay, so tell me some other things that you're talking about or learning about in this chapter.
So another thing is to find the least common multiple of two numbers.
Okay, so what's the approach there?
Well, an interesting fact is that the least common multiple times greatest common divisor equals the product between the two numbers.
All right, why don't you write that out as an equation?
So, let's say...
And since your brother hasn't seen this in a while, let's see if we can figure out on the fly, well, why this might be true, at least. The greatest common divisor times the least common multiple. Are we still on screen?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And that equals A times B.
Okay. So the greatest common divisor times the least common multiple is equal to the product. All right, why would that be the case?
Well, let's see. So, least common multiple is it's the smallest number that is a multiple of both A and B.
Okay.
So I guess maybe our first case is if A and B are relatively prime, then the least common multiple is just the product.
Okay, good. That's actually a great thing to think about in terms of reasoning. If the two numbers are relatively prime, we know the greatest common divisor is 1, and the least common multiple actually is the product. So okay, so we know it works there.
Well, let's see. So if the greatest common divisor is a number, here's an X, so let's use C. That means that the least common multiple has to be A times B divided by C. So why is this? Well, it makes sense because if they have this greatest common divisor here, then you're not going to need to multiply out to the full A times B. If they're both divisible by C, you do A times B divided by C, and it's a multiple of both because there's still a C in this whole product.
Ah, okay. So why don't you write that out and show why that's true?
I'll like say
without erasing what you're trying to prove.
Alright, so C times A times B over C. So I'll say, let's say A is M times C, and B is N times C. So you have A times B, and then divided by C means that you have it just turns into M times N times C, and there's still a C. So this is still divisible by A because you still have an A in here, and it's still divisible by B because you still have a B in here.
Okay, good. That's a great approach. How would you explain why this fact is true, that the greatest common divisor times the least common multiple is the product?
Well, it's sort of similar, but just like the maximum possible least common multiple for A and B is AB, and that can only occur when two numbers are relatively prime. So when you introduce a common factor, it's going AB has to be divided by something, and then that's the common factor.
Okay, great. Yeah, so this is actually a really neat idea. Just these two very simple concepts, or I shouldn't say simple necessarily, but basic concepts of the greatest common divisor and the least common multiple actually have an interesting relationship.
Yeah, so that you can find least common multiple is the product over the greatest common divisor.
Yeah, and so we know how to find the greatest common divisor using the Euclidean algorithm. And so once we found that, we can find the least common multiple. All right, so let's go on and talk about Diophantine equation. Okay?
Yep.
All right.